My name's Melissa Thomas. I'm 32 years old. Right now, I am standing in the boardroom while my dad reads a motion to remove me for cause. My sister Lena leans forward with a carefully practiced look of worry, speaking about my supposed instability. I do not argue. I do not defend. Instead, I slide a sealed folder across the table to Priya Shah, the inspector of elections. My voice is steady when I say, before any vote is taken, please count. The room stills, observers shift in their seats. They think they are about to watch me fall. They have no idea what is inside that folder. Before I tell you how we got here, tell me where you're listening from. I see all your comments. And if you enjoy triumphant revenge stories like this one, make sure you subscribe and switch on notifications. Now keep listening if you want to hear the full story of what happens when a family mistakes silence for weakness. You won't want to miss what comes next. Since I was small, I was trained to be useful. That was my role at home and later in the company. I noticed what others missed. I fixed the thing that might fail. If Mom wanted the house to look perfect before guests came, I scrubbed the corners and straightened the frames on the wall. If Dad needed numbers for a board packet, I stayed up late and built the charts. At family gatherings, I set chairs, plated food, and smiled. People said I was reliable. It sounded kind. It did not feel like care. It felt like a job that never ended. Being useful was the price to stay in the room. I learned to create no problems, solve every mess, and need nothing. Praise took the place of affection. Melissa can handle it, they would say. I made myself small so the plan could look big. That is how a role becomes a rule. You pretend the rule is your choice. The lesson started early. Saying no made me disloyal. Saying yes bought peace for a while. I became fluent in apology even when I was the one who got hurt. At school, teachers called me a leader. At home, that word meant I would carry more. I began to keep score in my head. Favors in, promises out, interest building in silence. It helped me feel less confused. It proved to me that I was not imagining the pattern. Later, I started to keep paper too. I saved receipts, emails, and notes. I wrote down who said what and when and why. I took photos of checks before I handed them over. Paper did not bend when feelings shifted. Paper did not forget the way people did. I did not tell anyone about my files. I did not need to. Keeping records made me calm. It was not revenge. It was insurance against being erased. Our family company looked generous on the outside. We threw charity events. We had glossy photos. There were donor plaques, speeches, and soft news stories. The company made us look like we were giving back. Sometimes we were. Sometimes we were giving a story. I staffed many events for free. I made silent auction lists, wrote thank you notes, and timed the big reveal of every check. I knew who liked their name in a program and who wanted a quiet nod. Inside, rules moved when it was convenient. If a friend needed a favor, a program expense could stretch to cover it. If a deadline was tight, a report could get cleaned up later. The shine on the outside hid small cracks within. People clapped for us. That applause covered a lot. It also covered me. I was the stagehand who made the show work, and stagehands are not meant to be seen. That is how erasure feels when the room smiles at you. Lena is my younger sister. She has ease. People relax around her. She is good at reading a room and feeding it what it wants. She learned from Mom that charm can bend light. She learned from Dad that a clean line can fix a messy story. I brought results. She brought a feeling. People remember feelings. Lena also learned something sharper. She learned that concern wins more support than credit. She began to murmur that I worked too hard, that I pushed too much, that I might need a rest. At first it sounded kind, then it grew into a script. Melissa is not well, said with a tilted head and soft voice. It spread faster than any project plan I wrote. I watched it move person to person like a new rule of the family. Concern used as a tool, concern used as a gate. I did not confront her. I wrote down who repeated it and when. Dad loves a strong story more than he loves a slow fact. He chairs the board like a conductor. Most directors are loyal to him. A few watch process closely. One sits on the fence until the wind picks a side. Dad likes meetings to end with a clean conclusion, even if the pieces do not fully fit. Minutes follow his lead, awkward details get trimmed, clear wins are kept. I learned the opposite rhythm. I learned that process is power when people underestimate you. I asked the corporate secretary for copies of minutes. I filed board packets. I studied how votes were recorded. I helped with shareholder mailings and saw how proxy cards worked. Dad believed I was helping him keep order. In truth, I was learning the system that could unseat anyone who abused it. I did not plan to use it then. I only wanted to know where truth lived when a room preferred a story. The test came during a cash crunch. Payroll was close. A vendor waited on a past due bill. The lender had started to watch us more closely. I saw the numbers and felt the cliff. I offered a solution. I proposed a short bridge loan from me. It would carry us through, protect jobs, and steady our name with the people who kept us afloat. I moved the money. I documented everything. I wrote a clear memo on the transfer. I saved the bank confirmation. I emailed Dad and the corporate secretary and asked them to acknowledge the receipt in writing. They did. The company survived the month. A week later, a local paper ran a small story about how Dad steered the company through headwinds. The photo showed him smiling as he shook a vendor's hand. Lena stood next to him. My name was not in the article. I did not care about a headline. I cared that the truth was missing again. That was when a harder thought set in. If I kept being silent, I would keep being invisible. If I stayed invisible, anyone could write any story about me and people would believe it because there would be no record that showed the truth. I sat with that thought. I did not cry. I did not rage. I took out my ledger and wrote a new rule for myself. I would not argue feelings. I would document facts. I would not fight in private rooms where truths get traded. I would build proof that could stand on its own, so I kept saving. I kept filing. I kept learning the slow parts of power. I also watched my sister's concern harden into plan. Little asks appeared, small meetings without me. Just checking on Melissa, said to people who mattered to Dad. The path was clear. They were going to try to move me out in public and they wanted the room to nod along. I saw it coming. I chose not to stop it. I chose to let it happen where witnesses would be present and where paper could speak. That is how the backstory ends and the trap begins. I did not change who I was. I changed how visible my work would be. If they needed a stage, I would build one. If they wanted an audience, I would invite one. And when the time came, I would let the numbers do what feelings never could, make the truth undeniable. I did not guess. I confirmed. It began with small calendar errors. Meetings about the annual agenda were set for times I could not attend. A draft budget moved without the attachments that I needed to review. A board memo was sent to everyone except me. I asked our corporate secretary, Marjorie, to resend the memo for my files. When she forwarded it, the banner showed that the original list did not include my name. I saved the forward and the original. That was the first clean mark on the timeline. Then I heard Lena's voice in the hallway. She spoke in a soft tone I knew well. She told a director that she was worried about Melissa and that I might need time away for my health. She used the word concern as if it were care, but she used it to move people. I stepped back into my office and wrote the time and the names. After that, I noticed other small shifts. A safety committee meeting was booked without my RSVP showing on the invite. A board chair prep call was set for a morning when I was on a plane, even though my travel had been on the calendar for weeks. By the end of that week, I had a clear line of what was happening. A smear was being built with soft hands and even softer voices. It would end in a public move to remove me for cause. I chose not to block the river. I chose to build a dam that would open at the right second. If they were building a story, I needed to see how it moved. I sent a harmless test email to a small list of managers and one director. The subject line was plain. The body said, "Please review the attached draft and send to the right folder." The attached file had a unique name. The file itself was a blank page. Within an hour, that file name showed up inside a private folder that only 3 people could access. I wrote down the time. I had my first leak path. I sent a second message with a tiny date error that did not affect the work. I wanted to see who would repeat the error word for word. 2 days later, a director raised that same wrong date in a meeting and blamed me for the mistake. I kept a straight face and apologized. When the meeting ended, I printed the page that held my planted error and stapled it to my notes. I did not need to argue, I needed a map. I also set a calendar trap. I created 2 overlapping invites for the same hour. One was labeled Wellness Check-in with me. One was labeled Vendor Renewal with Dad and Lena. I accepted both. 10 minutes before, I declined the wellness invite with a note that said, "Rescheduling documentation is complete on my end." That afternoon, a director asked if I was taking time off for stress. The words were too close to be a guess. I wrote down the time and the sender. The pattern was clear. I met with Jordan, an admin who had eyes on the printers. I asked him to call me if he saw print jobs with names like Succession, Interim Chief Executive Officer, or Health Review. He called me within 2 days. He said, "They are printing a talking points sheet." I asked him to tell me the time and the number of pages. I did not ask him to copy it. I was not building a theft. I was building a record of motion. Who printed when and how often was enough to show intent. I had coffee with one fence-sitter director. I used simple phrases. I said, "I hope the annual meeting is calm." I said, "We should keep lenders and clients confident." I watched which words made his eyes move. The words clients and lenders made him glance down. That told me what he feared to lose. I wrote it down in my notebook. I planned to make that fear my ally by inviting the right people to watch the vote. At the same time, I deepened my quiet talk with Marjorie, who kept the minutes. I did not ask her to betray anyone. I asked her questions about process. I asked her to show me where in the bylaws the inspector could be asked to authenticate proxies before any vote. I asked when a meeting could be adjourned and when it could not. Each answer gave me a place to stand. I left her office with clean copies and simple thanks. I kept my voice calm. Calm makes people helpful when a storm is coming. The trap had to be legal, simple, and fast. I hired a lawyer named Elliot Park. He liked clean paper and plain talk. We met in a small room with no windows and a long table. We wrote 3 lists. First, proxies. My cousin Tessa held a small block of shares. 2 other relatives held even smaller blocks. In the past, they asked me to help with forms because they did not want to attend meetings. I offered a formal solution. I drafted proxy agreements that gave me the right to vote their shares. The agreements were coupled with an interest because I handled their dividend administration and their quarterly reports. That detail made the proxies strong and not easy to revoke. I mailed clear letters that explained, in plain words, what a proxy is and what rights it grants. I also mailed a simple revocation form in case anyone changed their mind. No one did. I kept every delivery receipt. Second, the voting trust. A voting trust lets many owners place their shares into one pot so that a trustee can vote all of them with a single signature. I set up the trust and named myself as trustee. I named a neutral alternate trustee in case someone tried to claim I had a conflict. We opened a separate account so that any dividend could be paid out on time with clear memos. I wrote a 1-page report template and promised to send it every quarter. Routine makes power look boring. Boring is safe. No one challenged the trust. Third, majority written consents. In our jurisdiction, shareholders who hold a majority can take action without a meeting by signing written consents that state the action. Elliot drafted 2. The first consent removed 2 old directors and replaced them with independent directors I had already vetted. Carmen Ruiz, a former controller who studied rules and did not care about family drama, and Owen Blake, a restructuring advisor who loved process more than show. The second consent ratified Priya Shah as the independent inspector of elections for the annual meeting. Both consents were prepared, signed, and dated, but held for filing at the right moment. We also read the bylaws line by line. We highlighted the part that allowed any shareholder of record to ask the inspector to authenticate proxies and announce voting power before any vote. We flagged the part that barred adjournment to avoid a count once the inspector had begun to open the envelopes. We printed extra copies with tabs. I asked Elliot to write the section numbers on a small card I could keep in my pocket. He did. He said, "You are not building a speech. You are building rails." I nodded. Rails do not argue. Rails guide the car. Votes mattered, but a margin mattered more. I reached out to cousins who had mentioned money worries in our group chat. I asked how they were doing. When one said rent was tight, I offered to buy a small slice of her shares at a fair price, subject to the right of first refusal that our shareholder agreement required. I sent the notice to the company. I waited the required days. The company waived the right each time in a single sentence. I printed the waivers and placed them behind a tab labeled waivers. I paid by wire and saved each confirmation. The number of shares I gained was not large, but it was steady. Small moves add up when the math is close. The most important move was the note. Months earlier, during the cash crunch, I had made a bridge loan to the company. At that time, it was simple and fair. Now I met with Elliot and drafted an addendum to the note. The addendum said that if I were removed as an officer without cause, at my choice the outstanding balance could convert into a class of shares with enhanced voting rights. I did not have to convert. I could let the note run. But if they moved to remove me without a written cause that could stand in the light, I could convert at once. The addendum also said that the conversion would be effective on my notice and that the notice could be delivered the moment removal was attempted. We checked the math again and again. My personal shares plus the proxies gave me a strong base. The small buyouts added a few points. The voting trust gave me a way to cast aligned votes with one signature. The conversion clause in the note was the hinge. If they made a motion to remove me for cause and could not prove cause, then the clause would switch on at my notice. The voting power would cross 51% on standard shares, and if needed, the class with enhanced rights would add more certainty. The point was not to shout. The point was to make numbers speak. Paper only matters when the dates are clean. I called the transfer agent 2 weeks before the meeting and asked for the record date in writing. The record date sets who gets to vote. Any proxy, trust deposit, small buyout, or note addendum had to exist before that date. I checked my files. Every signature and every receipt was already dated before the record date. I made a timeline with boxes, stamps, and initials. I printed it on thick paper and placed it in the front of my folder. I asked Priya to accept my proxies and trust certificates in sealed envelopes with my initials on the back flap. When I met her, I laid the envelopes on the table and asked her to write the time on each one and to add her initials next to mine. We filled out a simple log with 3 columns: who delivered, what was delivered, and at what time. We both signed the bottom. I took a photo of the log and emailed it to myself and to my lawyer. If a fight later tried to erase a step, the ink would not be moved by opinion. I also confirmed with Priya what the process would be in the room. I asked, "If I ask you to authenticate holdings before any vote, can you do that?" She said yes. I asked, "If they try to adjourn to avoid the count, what happens?" She said, "Once I begin, we finish." Her calm voice helped. Calm people who know their job are anchors in a storm. They were preparing a performance. So I prepared a stage. I moved the annual meeting to a larger, neutral room with steady light and clear sound. I invited people whose opinions mattered to the people who were planning to betray me. I called Samuel Reed at our senior lender and asked if he wanted to send a representative to observe. He said yes. I invited 2 top vendors and 2 longtime clients. I also asked a few extended family shareholders to attend, including Tessa, who had given me her proxy. I did not issue a splashy notice. I sent simple invitations that said annual meeting and update. I kept my tone normal in every message, no hint of a fight. A calm tone draws people in and makes loud moves look loud. I placed the observers in the first 2 rows. I seated fence-sitter directors next to people who cared about order and steady leadership. I wanted them to feel the eyes on the back of their necks when they weighed a choice. I chose what I would wear. A dark suit, simple shoes, a soft blouse, no sharp jewelry, no bright color. I wanted to look like a person who held a process, not a person who walked into a brawl. I planned to speak in short lines and to ask for verification before any vote. I did not plan to argue. Arguments invite spin. Process invites an end. The room had 2 microphones on the table and 1 at a stand. I tested them the day before with the audio team. I asked for levels that let a normal speaking voice carry to the back row. I checked the room temperature and asked for neutral air. A cold room makes people angry. A hot room makes them dull. Neutral air keeps bodies calm. I prepared 3 full sets of documents. Each set had colored tabs, red for bylaws, blue for proxies and trust certificates, green for the bridge note and the conversion addendum, yellow for the majority written consents, white for the capitalization table as of the record date. I labeled 1 set inspector, 1 set secretary, and 1 set court, in case a judge ever needed to see the paper in the same form it existed in the room. I also had a small card with the key bylaw numbers in my pocket. My folder was dark blue so it would not shine under the lights. I placed a sticky note on the first page that said, "Stand, hand folder to inspector. Ask to authenticate, be quiet." If I had to read anything, I would read slowly and stop between lines. The aim was not to explain. The aim was to make the room itself deliver the truth. Plans only work if your body follows the plan. I wrote a small protocol for myself. The morning of the meeting, I would eat plain food, drink water, and stretch. I would keep a coin in my right pocket with a raised edge and touch it when I needed to focus. I would slow my breathing before I spoke. I would say only what the bylaws required me to say. If someone interrupted, I would say, "Point of order, please follow the bylaws." If someone questioned my health, I would not defend myself. I would point to the inspector and ask her to authenticate holdings. I also wrote a plan for after the meeting in case the room tried to drag me into a long fight. The plan said, do not argue in the hall, do not meet in small side rooms, do not join group chats. Make 1 short statement and then leave the room with my folder. If mom tried to pull me aside, I would hold her hands and say, "I love you, I will call you tonight." If dad tried to corner me, I would say, "Please put it in writing." Simple lines save energy when the heart is loud. The week before the meeting, I ran 3 full rehearsals with Elliot and 2 trusted staff. Jordan played dad and practiced speaking over me. Marjorie read motions in a clear, dry tone. In the first path, they made the motion, the inspector authenticated, the count was read, and the room shifted. In the second path, they tried to adjourn before the count, and I objected under the bylaw that bars adjournment once the inspector begins to open the envelopes. In the third path, they tried to delay by adding a new item about my health. I asked for contemporaneous documentation and asked for it to be added to the record. Then I waited in silence until the inspector resumed the count. We made backups. I saved digital copies on an encrypted drive and in a cloud folder. I printed extra paper sets and placed each in a separate bag. I left 1 with Elliot, 1 in my car, and 1 at home. I left a note with my assistant that if I texted 1 word, she would send a courier to Priya with a sealed copy of the conversion notice. I also wrote a small sentence to myself and paper clipped it to the inside of the folder. Do not defend, present, then be quiet. During rehearsal, I practiced where to look when Dad raised his voice. I chose a spot on the back wall and kept my eyes there until he stopped. There is 1 clause I did not tell anyone in that room, not even Priya. You and I are the only ones who know it now. The bridge note I made during the cash crunch carries an addendum. If I am removed as an officer without cause, I can choose to convert the note at once into a class of shares with enhanced voting rights. The notice can be given the same day, the same hour, the same minute. The conversion is effective on my notice. It is a lawful clause, it is simple. It is unusual in a family company, but it is not unusual in deals where a lender wants protection against unfair removal. This clause sits quiet unless they pull the trigger. If they do, the math changes while they are still speaking. The room will hear it in the numbers. I will not need to explain it to them in advance. I will not need to warn them. I will ask the inspector to authenticate. I will hand her the notice. She will read the totals after the conversion is recorded. They will think they are writing my ending. They are writing my beginning. I wrote a one-page, if this, then that plan and clipped it to the inside of my folder. If Dad calls a recess before the count, I will object under the bylaw that requires the inspector to authenticate holdings upon the request of any shareholder of record. If he ignores me, I will read the section number into the microphone and repeat my request. If Lena tries to add last-minute evidence about my health, I will ask for contemporaneous documentation and ask that it be placed in the record. There will be none. I will not discuss my health. I will point to the inspector and to the agenda. If a loyalist disputes a proxy, I will produce the chain of custody, the delivery receipts, the dated agreements, and the log with initials and times. I will ask the inspector to note the documents in her file. If someone moves to eject me from the room, I will state that I am a shareholder of record and the chief executive officer until lawfully removed, and that the bylaws allow me to be present. If security is called, I will sit with my hands folded and wait for the inspector to speak. I will not raise my voice. I will not move. If a director demands a private caucus without the inspector, I will object and ask that any caucus be recorded in the minutes with start and end times. If they insist, I will not attend. I will stay seated with the inspector. I also prepared for silence. If they grow cautious and try to skip the motion, I will ask for the agenda item to be read and for the inspector to authenticate holdings before any vote. If Dad tries to jump to other business, I will ask for the pending item to be resolved first. Rules are a floor. I will stand on them. When I finished the matrix, I read it twice and then I put it away. I looked at my hands. They were steady. That was the test I cared about. I did not want to hurt them. I wanted to stop them. I wanted the facts to stand where everyone could see them. I wanted an end to the story where usefulness meant silence. I wanted a beginning where proof, not volume, decided what was true. I closed the folder. I set my alarm. I slept. The morning of the annual meeting felt like the inside of a bell right before it rings. I woke before my alarm, ate toast, drank water, and stood with my hands on the counter until my breathing was slow. I put on the dark suit and soft blouse. I slipped a small coin into my right pocket so my thumb could find the raised edge. The folder was ready, red tabs for bylaws, blue for proxies, green for the bridge note, yellow for the written consents, white for the capitalization table. At the venue, the air was even and the light was clean. I walked the rows and greeted our guests. Samuel Reed's representative shook my hand and said, "Looking forward to a straightforward meeting." I said, "So am I." Two clients nodded hello. Tessa took a seat and gave me a small thumbs up. Priya arrived with a neat briefcase, gave me a polite nod, and sat where she could see the table and the floor microphone. Directors gathered at the table. Dad's laugh came first. He clapped a loyalist on the shoulder. Lena followed with a manila folder and a careful smile. She hugged an aunt in the aisle and rested her hand on the aunt's arm. The room softened around her. I sat with my folder and my hands folded. I did not speak first. I did not need to. At the hour, Dad rapped the gavel. "The meeting will come to order," he said. Quorum was confirmed. The agenda was adopted. Routine moved through the room like a slow drum. I kept my eyes on the spot above the back wall and let the minutes pass. I checked the seating plan one last time. Fence-sitter directors sat beside clients who valued order. Vendors sat near the lender's representative. Extended family held the third row, where their faces could be seen by the table. I tested the table microphone with a normal speaking voice and asked the audio tech to leave the gain alone once we began. I kept a bottle of water within reach but out of sight so I would not fidget. Every small choice was a way to keep the room steady. The first agenda item was a leadership update. Dad handed the floor to Lena. She stood with her folder. "I care about my sister," she said. "This is hard, but hard things are part of leadership." She clicked to a slide with late-night timestamps from my emails. This pattern concerns me, she said. She clicked again. A screenshot showed an unfinished draft and a rescheduled wellness check-in. I recognized my calendar trap. The proof was not the picture, the proof was how fast it spread. Lena kept her tone warm. I love my sister, she said. We owe it to our people to make sure our leader can rest. She said stability, continuity, and care. She told the room I might break and take the company with me. The slides were soft, the edge hard. I kept my face calm and watched the room instead. A client leaned forward. Samuel's representative underlined a line. A cousin put her phone away and frowned. Priya looked only at the screen and the table, not at me. The witness who mattered most was not on my side or theirs. She was on the side of order. That was enough. Lena told a story about a late-night email that asked a manager to change a list. She did not say why the list had to change. A vendor had been double paid and the correction saved us fees. She described the late hour as proof of impulse. She described my steady tone as cold. She did not lie with facts. She lied with framing. That is how soft attacks work. They take normal effort and call it a flaw. They take duty and call it damage. She read a text I sent to Mom that said, "I will call you after the meeting." She said it as if I had shut Mom out. She did not mention that I had spent the morning with Mom fixing a delivery mix-up for a charity event. I did not defend myself. I did not lean toward the microphone. I let the room compare the slide to what they knew of my work. A few did not. It did not matter. The inspector would hold paper soon, and paper does not pick sides. Lena's last slide said leadership plan during recovery. My name sat at the side with temporary leave for health reasons. In the center box was the name of an interim chief executive officer who once called me kiddo. A small laugh hid as a cough somewhere in the back. Out of love and duty, Lena said, we should consider a pause. She looked at Dad. The baton passed. Dad stepped closer to the microphone and searched the room with his eyes. He wanted to catch 4 or 5 pairs of eyes and hold them. This is not a punishment, he said. This is a pause. He said he would ask an interim to serve for 90 days while I rested. He called the motion a duty of care. His voice made the words sound like help. The lines were old to me. I had heard them all my life when someone wanted me to carry a load and call it love. Dad thanked Lena for her courage. He used his slow press voice. We must be responsible stewards, he said. Clients, lenders, and families depend on us. He turned a page he did not need as if to show the weight of duty. Then he said, I move that the board remove Melissa Thomas as Chief Executive Officer for cause. A loyalist said second at once. Dad said the step was temporary and for the good of the company. He listed concerns. None were facts. He named no written cause, no policy, no investigation. He said I had shown signs of strain and had missed wellness check-ins. He did not know my plan lived inside that hole. I felt the coin's edge and kept my eyes on the back wall. The motions sat on the table. The trap waited inside the process. Chairs creaked. Someone whispered and was shushed. I let the motion sit for a full count of 10. I did not defend myself. If I argued, the room would turn to sound. I needed the room to turn to paper. I stood and placed my hands on my folder. Point of order, I said. Before any vote is taken, I request that the Inspector of Elections authenticate the holdings of record and the proxies deposited with her office. I turned to Priya, not to Dad. I slid the dark blue folder to the edge. Priya stood, crossed to me, and accepted it. She opened to the blue tab, lifted the sealed envelopes, and checked the initials and times on each flap. Dad tried to speak over me. We can proceed to a vote, he said. I did not answer him. I addressed only the inspector. Please authenticate the holdings, I said again. Priya nodded to herself and began to open the envelopes. The room grew quiet in a new way. You could hear the slide of paper and the click of a pen. I stood with my hands folded. Stand, ask, be quiet. Silence had been the dress they put on me. Now silence was the tool in my hand. Priya opened the first envelope and checked the signature. She compared the name to the freeze list and put a small check mark in the margin. She did the same with the second and third. She moved with the same pace I had seen when we met to log the envelopes. She did not look hurried. She did not look slow. She looked exact. Marjorie kept the minutes in her tight hand. The camera light glowed. I thought of how many times I had felt small in a room like this. Then I thought of the tabs in my folder and felt the steadiness that comes when a plan holds. As Priya worked, I glanced at Elliot in the second row. He looked at me and then down to the yellow tab. On cue, I slid the yellow papers forward under the blue stack so they were easy to see. They were the majority written consents that would seat Carmen Ruiz and Owen Blake as independent directors the moment the count confirmed the holdings. They were signed and dated, ready to file. Priya spoke in a level tone. "I will authenticate the proxies and trusts," she said. "Then I will announce preliminary voting power." She turned to Marjorie. "Please mark the time." Marjorie wrote it into the minutes. Dad tapped the gavel. "We will keep order," he said, but a new line had appeared across his face. I kept my lines short. "Inspector," I said, "after you announce preliminary holdings, please review the notice under the green tab." She gave a tiny nod. Elliot flipped a page and stilled his hands. A loyalist raised a hand. "This is unnecessary," he said. "We should vote." Priya did not turn to him. "I will complete the authentication," she said. Calm is stronger than volume when paper is in motion. Priya lifted the green tabbed sheet and read the heading without expression. She placed it back under the blue stack. "Noted," she said, so the secretary could write the word. Her process was a drumbeat. It kept time when people wanted to speed up or slow down. Elliot kept his pen still. He had told me once, "Do not chase interruptions. Let them fall off the edge of the table." I let them fall. Dad tried to rush to the vote. "Stakeholders are waiting," he said. He lifted the gavel. "Point of order," I said. "The bylaws require the inspector to determine the number of shares present in person or by proxy before any vote. I have requested that determination." I read the section number from the small card in my pocket and then stopped speaking. Priya spoke before Dad could. "I am proceeding," she said. She opened the last envelope, checked a trust certificate, and wrote totals on her sheet. She turned to the room. "Preliminary voting power is as follows," she said, pens lifted. Heads turned. The quiet changed from doubt to attention. Numbers were about to enter the air. A loyalist director said, "Inspector, this is irregular." Priya answered, "It is in the bylaws." He said, "This is disruptive." She said, "The purpose is accuracy." He stopped. Even Dad did not try to argue with a woman who spoke like a scale that had been calibrated in front of everyone. The weight of her words did not need volume. It needed only a record. I breathed on the same count I had used all week. 4 in, 4 hold, 4 out. The coin warmed under my thumb. The room waited in a tight silence that had no air in it. The next part would not be a speech. It would be numbers read into a microphone. Numbers have edges. They cut through the fog. They do not care who is charming or who is loud. They do not care who calls you kiddo. They line up and they stand. I let a breath out and pressed the coin in my pocket. I thought of the child who fixed things before anyone asked. I thought of saving payroll while someone else took the photo. I thought of the ledger that did not bend to feelings. I did not think of revenge. I thought of correction. I stood still while the inspector prepared to speak. The next sound would be numbers, not noise. Priya did not rush. She broke each seal with the same careful motion, checked the initials on the flap, and matched the names to the freeze list. She read the chain of custody log out loud so Marjorie could enter it into the minutes. Who delivered, what was delivered, and the time. A loyalist director cleared his throat as if to speak, then stayed quiet. The sound in the room changed. It was no longer a speech hall. It was a counting room. I stood still. The dark blue folder lay open in front of the inspector. The blue tab held the proxies and trust certificates. The yellow tab held the written consents. The green tab held the bridge note and the conversion addendum. The white tab held the capitalization table as of the record date. Each tab was placed so that one action would lead to the next without me saying much at all. That was the point. My words had been doubted for months. Numbers would not be. Priya checked signatures against specimen cards and she verified addresses. She asked Marjorie to read the bylaw section that said the inspector's determinations are conclusive for the meeting. Dad tried to interrupt with a soft, "We appreciate the effort," but Priya held up one hand, palm low and steady. "I will complete the authentication," she said. "Then the chair may proceed." Her tone was not rude, it was exact. The room settled into her pace. From the front row, I heard the lender's representative quietly say, "Good," to no one in particular. One of the clients folded his hands and stopped fidgeting. Tessa's foot, which had been tapping, went still. I kept my eyes on the back wall and breathed. Stand, ask, be quiet. I had rehearsed those 3 steps until they were muscle. They were the rail. The rail would carry the car. Priya finished the last envelope and looked up. "I have authenticated the proxies and the voting trust deposits," she said. "I will state preliminary voting power." Heads tilted toward the table, pens weighted above pads. She spoke the numbers in a clear tone that carried without strain. Based on the record date list and the authenticated proxies and trust certificates, the voting power present in person or by proxy is as follows. She named directors and major holders in order, then she said my name. Melissa Thomas, including proxies and trust deposits, a majority of the votes present. A small murmur moved across the first rows. A loyalist director stared at the table. The fence-sitter's pen stopped moving. Dad did not look at me. His jaw tightened once and then went still. He was a man who loved stories. This was not a story, this was a ledger spoken aloud. Priya added, "These are preliminary numbers for standard shares and do not include any special classes." She looked to me. I did not speak yet. I let the room sit inside the fact that on ordinary votes with ordinary shares I already held a majority. I had not yelled. I had not pleaded. I had placed paper into a process and the process had spoken. People who had leaned away from me began to lean back towards center, as if the floor had shifted by a few degrees and their bodies wanted to stand level again. Dad cleared his throat. "Given these numbers," he said, "we can still proceed to the motion. The concerns are about cause and continuity." He wanted the room to think the count was a footnote. It was not. It was the hinge. I turned one page in the folder to the green tab. I kept my voice steady. "Inspector, please review the notice under the green tab," I said. Priya lifted the green sheet and read the heading for the record. "Notice of conversion under bridge loan addendum." She read the first paragraph in a level tone. It said that removal of me as an officer without cause would, at my choice, allow the outstanding balance of the note to convert into a class of shares with enhanced voting rights, effective on my notice. It also said that a removal that claimed for cause, but did not include written particulars, investigation results, and supporting documentation would be treated as removal without cause for the limited purpose of this conversion. I handed her a smaller page clipped behind the notice. It held the time-stamped consent from that morning. I had signed it at dawn. "This notice is delivered and accepted," Priya said. She turned to the secretary. "Please mark the time." Marjorie wrote it into the minutes. Priya then picked up the white tab with the capitalization table and used a pen to add a column. She did the math out loud, row by row, so everyone could follow. "Standard shares remain as stated," she said. "Class B shares issued upon conversion of the note, recorded, voting power updated." She looked up. "Melissa Thomas now controls 51% of the shares." It took only a minute, but the minute felt wide and bright, like a window thrown open. Dad's hand moved toward the gavel and then stopped. Lena's eyes were wide and wet, but no tears fell. A client exhaled a breath I had not known he was holding. The lender's representative wrote a single word and closed his notebook. I did not smile, I did not look for Mom, I did not add a sentence about fairness. None of that would help. The point was that the room, the paper, and the math agreed. I had felt erased for years. Now my work was visible in a language that did not depend on anyone's approval. I turned the yellow tab toward Priya. Inspector, the majority written consents are ready for filing, I said. She reviewed the signatures and dates. These consents are in proper form, she said. The actions stated therein are effective upon delivery to the secretary. I looked at Marjorie. Please accept and file the consents, I said. She slid them into a folder for executed documents and stamped the top page with the date and time. Carmen Ruiz and Owen Blake stood from the second row. Priya said, "Please take your seats at the table." The two open chairs were waiting. Dad hesitated, then nodded them forward because he had no ground to deny what the consents made true. Carmen sat and opened a small notebook. Owen folded his hands. They did not smile at me. They did not need to. They were there to be steady, not friendly. With the new board seated, I said, "Point of order. I move to remove the chair of the board and to elect an interim chair for the remainder of this meeting." Silence followed, then Owen said, "Second." Priya looked to Marjorie. "Please record the motion and the second," she said. "We will proceed to a vote." The vote was quick. Priya read the totals. The motion carried. Dad set the gavel down. He looked at it the way a person looks at a keepsake that has become a plain object. Carmen, now acting as interim chair, said, "Next item." I said, "I move that Lena Thomas be placed on administrative leave pending an independent review of communications and documents related to allegations about the chief executive officer's health." Owen said, "Second." Priya asked for the vote. The motion carried. Carmen looked at the human resources director, who had been waiting near the door with a sealed envelope. "Please provide the notice," Carmen said. Human resources stepped forward and placed the envelope in Lena's hands. I spoke once for the minutes. "The purpose is to preserve trust and order," I said. No further comment. I had promised myself not to gloat. I had promised myself not to add a single extra word. I kept that promise. When the motions were done, Carmen asked if I wished to make a brief statement as Chief Executive Officer. I stood with my hands on the table and spoke in short lines. "Thank you for your patience," I said. "Our company will follow process and protect our people. We will complete an independent review. We will continue serving our clients and paying our vendors on time. We will publish governance changes this week." I looked at Priya. "Please attach these remarks to the minutes." Then I sat down. I did not call out my family. I did not explain the smear. I did not use the word betrayal. I used words like process, review, and schedule. People who came for a spectacle left with a plan. That was the point. Samuel Reed's representative stood to go and paused by the table. "You have what you need," he said in a low voice. "We will note today's stability." Two clients shook my hand. One said, "Thank you for the clarity." A vendor said, "We are renewing next quarter." The room had been an echo chamber for months. In 10 minutes, it became an order sheet. I handed a one-page release to Marjorie for the record. The names of the new directors, the confirmation of the inspector's count, and the steps for the review. No adjectives. No heat. Just facts that could be quoted without spin. The people who liked drama looked disappointed. The people who liked clean lines looked relieved. The human part still mattered, even if I did not feed it. A loyalist director stared at the wood grain like it could tell him a way back. A cousin texted, then looked up at me with a small, guilty shrug. Mom sat in the second row with her hands tight around her purse. Her face was pale. I did not look for comfort there. I had not come for comfort. I had come for order. Lena stayed seated when human resources handed her the envelope. Her eyes moved, searching for a place to land. She tried a smile and could not hold it. She said, "Melissa," very softly, as if the room were empty and we were at the kitchen table. I did not answer. There was nothing to say that the minutes could use. Security was not needed. The math had already emptied the stage. As the room cleared, I gathered my folder. The coin in my pocket felt warm and light. Priya closed her briefcase and gave me a small nod with no smile attached. It meant we had both done our jobs. Carmen and Owen spoke quietly to Marjorie about next steps. The gavel sat on the table, no longer a symbol, just wood and weight. I did not touch it. I did not need to. I walked to the door and paused for one breath, not to savor, to settle. Then I stepped into the hall. The reversal was complete and it was on the record. The room emptied, but the work began. Elliot and I stepped into a side office with Carmen and Owen. We made a short list on a whiteboard. First line, certify the minutes. Second, confirm access controls. Third, message the people who keep us alive, clients, vendors, and staff. Marjorie brought in the draft minutes within an hour. We read, fixed 3 small items, and signed. Priya certified the count and totals. I asked Marjorie to email the certified minutes and place a hard copy in the corporate record. Dad tried one last move by email. He wrote, adjourn the meeting nunc pro tunc to before the inspectors count. Elliot answered with one line. Adjournment cannot retroactively undo actions after authentication. See the cited bylaw. Carmen replied, the minutes stand. There was no reply to that. I called the head of information technology. Lock administrative rights on the finance server, I said. Change master passwords, reset badge permissions, and log every action with timestamps. He asked, effective when? I said, now. A director texted me. I lost access to the shared drive and added a sad face. I did not answer the face. I answered the fact. New permissions are being issued, I wrote. You will receive yours once you sign the updated policy. Human resources began the standard steps. Company cards were deactivated. Travel profiles were paused. 1 fleet car was collected. The receptionist issued new badge lists to security. No scenes, I said, no raised voices. I wrote 3 short messages. To staff, thank you for your focus. Operations continue. Questions go to your manager. To clients, thank you for your trust. Today we completed a governance update. Your contracts and timelines are on track. To vendors, we are confirming contacts and payment procedures. Your invoices will be paid on time. We used our common inbox so replies would be logged. By late afternoon, fence sitters asked for short meetings. I kept each to 15 minutes. One said, I did not know about the conversion clause. I said, you did not need to, you needed to follow the rules. Another said, I was worried about the lender. I said, the lender saw order. Both nodded. Before I left, I walked past the accounting room. The team was working as if it were any other week. The company did not stop because a few people moved seats. The next morning, I printed a 1-page sheet titled Stability Plan. It had 5 items. I taped it inside my folder and read it before meetings. First, we froze related party transactions. Any deal that touched family had to stop until reviewed. We sent notices to anyone with an agreement that smelled like a favor. Your arrangement is paused pending independent review, the letter said. You may submit documents. Some sent thick packets, some sent nothing. Second, we required retroactive disclosures. Each director and officer filled out a new conflict of interest form that listed every payment, loan, and referral from the last 3 years. A blank box tells one truth. A full box tells another. Third, we lowered approval thresholds and added an independent audit committee. In the past, Dad loved big dollar thresholds because they made him feel powerful when he signed. I cared about speed and checks. We moved many approvals down to management and set clear limits, then put random audits on top. We hired an outside auditor. Fourth, we standardized proxy protocols. Priya agreed to serve as inspector for future meetings. We wrote clear rules for how proxies are delivered, logged, and stored, how the record date is confirmed, and how counts are read. We turned experience into policy. Fifth, we built a whistleblower line and a document retention policy. The line went to a third party. The policy listed how long to keep email, texts, and notes. We trained managers in small groups. We also fixed procurement. No emergency vendors without review, I said. If someone says the word emergency, they must also say the word documentation. At week's end, we posted a governance summary and sent it to clients and lenders. It said what changed, when, and why. It did not mention family ties. Anyone who wanted detail could read the minutes. Everyone else could watch on-time deliveries and paid invoices. Dealing with family was slower than policy. I wrote a short letter to Dad. Effective today, it said, you are moved to an honorary, non-voting role. You will have no signatory authority, no expense card, and no access to confidential files except those available to all shareholders. I thanked him for his years of service. The letter went out by courier, not by text. Dad called as soon as the envelope landed. This is extreme, he said. We can work this out at home. I said, company issues belong in company rooms. Your counsel can call Elliot. He tried. I am still your father, I said, and I am still the chief executive officer. We were both right. Only one title mattered at work. With Lena, we followed the process we had set in motion. Human Resources scheduled interviews. The independent reviewer asked for devices and consent to pull copies of personal emails that touched company work. They found messages where concern had been rehearsed with directors. They found versions of slides that removed the parts that showed why late-night emails were needed. They found a phone photo of a page from my notebook. It proved she had tried to twist my notes into doubt. We documented the steps. I did not lead the review. I read the reports only when they were finished. The reviewer wrote that Lena had acted to undermine the chief executive officer and had misrepresented facts in a way that risked harm to the company. The report listed violations of our code of conduct. It recommended discipline up to and including termination. I met with Carmen and Owen. We will offer two options, I said. An apology placed in the corporate record and a demotion to a non-manager role with a probation period. Or a resignation. We sent the letter with the options and a short deadline. After a day, Lena's counsel asked for a meeting. In that room, Lena looked small and steady. She said, I did not mean to hurt the company. I said, intent is not the measure here. Impact is. She asked for a third option, leave with benefits and no apology. I cannot put those words in the minutes, she said. I said, you can choose the path you want. The record will reflect the choice. She looked at the table. She chose resignation. The board accepted it and the minutes carried one short line, resignation accepted. For Dad, there was no public scene. He sent messages to allies that said I had overreached. The allies called me. I told each one the same thing, please read the minutes. A week later, those messages stopped. He kept the title Founder Emeritus. Cousins split into two groups. The first group sent quiet notes that said, proud of you, and thank you for protecting the company. The second group sent questions that sounded like accusations. Why did you embarrass Dad? One wrote. You could have kept it private. I copied and pasted the same sentence to each reply. The actions were taken in a meeting because the actions that forced them were taken in a meeting. Some stopped writing after that. Tessa asked to meet for coffee away from the office. I gave you my proxy because you showed me every line, she said. No one has ever done that in this family. I said, you trusted me, I will keep earning that. She laughed once. I did not expect you to be the hurricane. I said, I am not the hurricane, I am the levee. Donors and clients liked the new calm. A hospital foundation renewed a contract. A school district sent a note that said, we appreciate the clarity. Vendors signed new agreements with simple service levels and no special favors. The local paper ran a short piece. Company confirms governance changes, it said. The story quoted our release and nothing else. The reporter called me for a comment. I said, we are focused on operations and transparency. He said, any comment from your family? I said, our public comments are in the minutes. He ran the piece. Mom called me the second night after the meeting. Are you eating? She asked. I said, yes. She said, your father is quiet. I said, I know. She said, we are still a family. I said, yes, we are. We will be better if work stays at work. She did not push back. She asked if I would come for Sunday dinner. I said, not this week. An old family friend tried to mediate later. He said, your dad feels pushed out of his life's work. I said, he is welcome to be proud of what he built. He is not welcome to break it. The friend said, you have grown hard. I said, I have grown clear. Lena sent a text that said, I am sorry you felt hurt. I did not answer a sentence that put my feelings on trial instead of her actions. 2 days later, she sent, "I am leaving town for a while." When a house is loud for years, quiet feels like a warning at first. The week after the meeting, I woke at odd hours. My body still thought it had to watch every door. I set a new bedtime and kept it. I left my phone in the kitchen. I scheduled therapy. I told the therapist I did not want to rehearse the past. I wanted a plan for staying steady while everyone's roles shifted. She said, "Your plan is already visible in how you work. We will borrow from that." We wrote simple rules. Drink water before any meeting that might run hot. Name the rule you are using when you use it. Leave rooms when rules are not respected. I hired a trainer. We met early. He taught me to breathe through effort and pause between sets. "Work happens in the pause," he said. I kept one evening a week for myself. No emails. No family calls, no quick reads. I cooked something simple, walked around the block, and let the day stay outside my door. I made a rule for favors, no undocumented favors. If I helped, it would be in writing, with a time limit, and with a record of what was promised in return. The rule was not about money. It was about respect. When people know you require a record, they decide how much they value the ask. Many asks stop right there. Fewer group texts, fewer invites, more time with people who liked quiet wins. I kept the coin in my pocket out of habit. On Friday, I stopped in the doorway of the boardroom. The lights were off. The table was clean, the chairs were pushed in. I did not step inside. I did not reach for the gavel. I did not take a picture. I stood there for one breath and then kept walking. Power is not the tool you wave. It is the rule you keep. I did not warn them because warnings never worked in our house. When I was a kid, I said, "This is too much for me," and the answer was, "You can handle it." When I grew up, I said, "We need to follow the policy," and the answer was, "We know what we are doing." Private truth turned into a debate about tone. Facts turned into a vote about feelings. If I had warned Dad or Lena, they would have rushed to the phone and shaped the story faster than I could hold the paper. I chose the only forum they respect. A room with witnesses, a clock, and minutes. That room keeps its own memory. I did not set a trap to hurt them. I set a process to stop them. A warning would have taught them nothing. It would have only taught them that I would blink. They learned to move only when consequences stood in public and the minutes were already typed. The boardroom was the only place where the noise would not drown the count. I let the betrayal ripen because timing matters. If you cut a fruit too early, you get sour. If you cut it too late, you get rot. I waited for the day when the people who preach order would be forced to meet it. I also did not warn them because I do not owe anyone another chance to erase me. I gave many chances. I carried the load. I cleaned up messes, took the late calls, and paid the bill when it saved the story. Warning them would have been another unpaid job. I am done working for free on other people's mistakes. If someone wants to learn, they can read the minutes like everyone else. What changed was not that I became cold. What changed was that I stopped paying with silence. For years I thought being useful was the same as being worthy. I made everything smooth. I let others take the bow because the show mattered more than the credit. The day I wired the mortgage money, I felt a door start to close inside me. It did not slam. It pressed shut a little more every time I was told to be grateful for being steady. The meeting finished closing it. I knew I had changed when I chose paper over approval. It is easy to chase a nod from Dad or a soft smile from Mom. It is hard to say, "Put it in writing," and then sit with the quiet that follows. The ledger that once felt like a cage turned into a compass. It did not trap me. It pointed me. When I wrote down a promise, I could see where I stood. When I kept every email, I could see the pattern. Patterns make me calm. Calm lets me act. I also changed how I name things. I used to call my quick fixes love. I used to call my late nights duty. Now I call them what they are, choices. Choices have costs. Some I will still make. I will still stay late for the team when a truck breaks down. I will still visit Mom when she needs help with a form. But I will not let anyone use my care as proof that I am easy to move. The change is simple. I am visible now. I show the work while I do it, and I put the result where no one can bend it. I wrote 3 principles on a card and taped it to the inside of my notebook. First, no undocumented favors. If I help, it is written, timed, and signed. If someone hates the pen, they can keep the ask. Second, no unminuted decisions. Big choices live in rooms with a table, a clock, and a person who writes things down. If someone says, "This can be off the record," my answer is, "Then it can be after the meeting." Third, no silent rescues. If I fix something, the record will show who asked, what I did, and what changes next so it does not happen again. I added 2 habits to keep me steady. I tell people my boundary one time and then I keep it. I do not explain the boundary again. I also give myself time before I answer any message that tries to rush me. Delay is not defiance. Delay is a tool. When I slow a choice by even 5 minutes, I hear my own voice instead of the crowd. That is how I refuse the old role without starting a fight in every room. These principles are not armor. They are rails. Rails keep the car on the track and let it move far. Rails do not make you safe from storms. They make you ready for them. I am not trying to live without risk. I am building a life where the risks are chosen and the record is clear. 2 days after the meeting, I went back to the boardroom alone at dusk. The building had that hollow end-of-day sound, like a shell that still remembers the ocean. I flipped on the low lights and set the final signed minutes in the cabinet. The lock clicked, small and certain. I labeled the spine with the date. It looked like any other binder on the shelf. I liked that. Power should look plain. I stood by the window and watched the parking lot empty. A vendor's truck pulled out. The staff door closed. The sun dropped behind the red brick across the street and took the glare with it. I thought about Dad's hand hovering over the gavel and then retreating. I thought about Lena's eyes when the inspector read the totals. I thought about Mom's voice on the phone when she said we are still a family. All of those thoughts passed like cars at a light. They were not the point anymore. I turned the lights off. The room went soft. I ran my thumb over the coin in my pocket and felt the raised edge. I did not look back for a second look at the table. I did not take a photo. I opened the door, stepped into the hall, and let it close behind me. The story that used to run me now runs on paper. That is enough. Go ahead and share your story in the comments. And if this revenge story resonated with you, then subscribe to the channel for more stories about timing, proof, and quiet power.